Shadow of the Colossus may be one of the greatest games ever made. Well, thanks for coming, guys. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button and join us. I realized that was a bit of an anticlimax. But if that's all a video had to say, I'd find it a little bit hard to disagree with it. I mean, Shadow of the Colossus is just that good. Hell, even Yahtzee of Zero Punctuation, a traditionally hard-to-please reviewer, had nothing but nice things to say about it. And for a game that came out in 2005, it was well ahead of its time. Sure, there were other massive worlds at the time, but nothing was quite as captivating as Shadow of the Colossus. Even more recent games that draw upon it, like Breath of the Wild or Horizon or Last of Us 2, apparently? They've only really flirted with a lot of Shadow's more enchanting aspects, despite the fact that they are mechanically more rich. I mean, when you get down to it, Shadow of the Colossus is a pretty straightforward game. All you do is ride a horse around a barren environment killing living statues. It's basically Attack on Titan, minus the steampunk Spider-Man gear and the undertones of Nazi ideology. Unless... Enhance image! Fuck the and fuck the... My god. Now, don't get it twisted, there's nothing wrong with mechanically simplistic games. Quite the opposite. In this day and age of multiple menus, subsystems, and stats, it's a welcome change of pace to not have to worry about which sword does 1.5% more damage. Simple systems can even lead to super in-depth gameplay experiences. Look at the likes of platformers and rhythm games. Simple, yes, but really enjoyable nonetheless. And Shadow falls squarely in the area of satisfying. I mean, how could it not be? You're scaling beasts the size of houses and penetrating them till they can't stand anymore. Kinda what I imagine sex with Lady Dimitrescu is like. Yet, despite the straightforward nature of the game, no two Colossus are the same. By the time you think you're used to fighting them, the game pulls the rug out from under you and introduces underwater fights, aerial combat, horseback fights, and even whatever the hell this guy is. It creates this fantastic sense of mystery. You never really know what's around the corner, and this spectacle is one of the reasons Shadows remains so unique. I mentioned before that, yeah, the world is a bit barren, but I think this is in service of the game. It's just big enough that traveling from one Colossus to the other never feels dull, and the emptiness really creates a sense of loneliness and isolation, and makes you reflect on your in-game actions. For example, every time you cross this bridge post-second Colossus, you're subjected to its corpse. It gives this great sense of progression, and makes you wonder if you're actually doing the right thing. But you guys all get that. I mean, we've all played Shadow of the Colossus, right? Please don't embarrass me. There are girls watching. So what I really want to do is pose a question to you. What is Shadow of the Colossus actually about? I mean, at the start of the game, you're traveling to this foreign land with a girl on the back of your horse, have a quick chat with Satan, and go kill the titular 16 Colossi. Once done, you turn into a demon, die, the girl wakes up, finds a baby, roll credits.
That feels like an oversimplification.
Now, admittedly, there is more to the narrative than that, but not too much. Take for instance the relationship between Wanderer and Mono. Yeah, her name is Mono, not that the game would ever tell you that. Now, most people read their relationship as lovers, but just because she's spending 90% of the game on her back doesn't mean anything sexual is happening. Damn! There is like one tender moment between them, sure, but it's not exactly sexually charged. I think the romance idea comes from an overexposure in Western media. All too often do we see protagonists trying to save love interests from some horrible fate, and while it is a trope for Japanese storytelling, they can often depict protagonists saving females without a romantic implication. Take for instance Demon Slayer, a show you should all be watching. Shut up about Demon Slayer, you weeb! Besides, hero saves damsel is a little too basic for Shadow of the Colossus to be mentioned among the best games ever. So what exactly makes it so special? Well, if you ask me, I mean it'd be weird if you didn't because you clicked on this video, so clearly you want my opinion. Shadow of the Colossus is a modern Greek tragedy. Look at how familiar the iconography is in the game. The visuals and clothing design of Wanderer and the other characters all have a distinctly Greek feel to them. Now you may think, hey, that makes sense. The Colossus are kinda similar to the Titans from Hercules. Well, not incorrect from a linguistic sense. Titans and Colossus are both big monsters. The Greek versions of Titans are constantly misrepresented as lumbering beasts, rather than the proto-gods they actually were in the original mythology. Hell, renowned inbred sex pest Zeus is the son of the Titans. Misrepresentation aside, Shadows draws much more heavily from the more human Greek legends rather than the deific ones. More specifically, the 12 Labours of Hercules with a splash of the Argonauts and the tragedy of Orpheus. Now the obvious comparison you can make is in the numbers of labours for Hercules and the Colossus hit list for Wanderer. However, there are 4 more trials for Wanderer because he's just the type of guy who likes to one-up people, or in this case 4-up people. What an asshole! but it's the actual beasts that each of the heroes fight where the comparison rings a bit more true. A bull, a lion, a hydra, and you could argue that the fourth Colossus, Phaedra, resembles a horse-deer amalgamation.
I thought you said it was a giraffe.
Okay, I may be reaching again with that last one, but just look at the fan names and developer nicknames for the Colossi. Minotaur, Cerberus, Hydrus, Argus, Poseidon. These names are more Greek than my favorite yogurt. Shadow also plays into Greek tragedies of men messing with arcane forces that they probably shouldn't. Like Orpheus traveling to the underworld to save his muse, the same could be seen in Wanderer's story. Because, spoilers for a 1,000-year-old fable, didn't end well for Orpheus, with his muse, not saying that, being trapped in hell forever after he tried to sneak a peek at her. Like Hercules, you could read Wanderer's journey as one of redemption, though in his case it's a self-imposed one. I mean, Wanderer has alienated himself from his people and willingly accepts that this quest will kill him. Much like the fable of Pandora's box, Wanderer's disregard for these arcane forces lead not only to his death, but the death of several individuals and innocent creatures. And it is facilitated by a woman, though unwilling in Mono's case. Also, and I can't stress this enough, he did murder a bunch of innocent creatures, most of whom don't actually aggro when approached, so it's kind of worse. These tectonic beasts, for the most part, keep to themselves, and when you really get up close with them, there's a certain innocence to a lot of them. Heck, the director specifically wanted sad music to play after you killed them, so it's designed to give you pause for thought. There may be a certain level of satisfaction driving your sword into these creatures, but afterwards when their lifeless corpses fall to the ground, there's a sense of shame and disgust, kinda like when I think about sex with Lady Dimitrescu. Seriously, when you read into the narrative, you stole a corpse, or at the very least kidnapped an unconscious woman, both are pretty gross, took cultural relic to commit genocide against innocent creatures, again, can't stress that enough, who are keeping an evil spirit sealed, so I'd be hard pressed to believe for a minute Wanderer is a good guy. The simple yet addictive gameplay and open-ended nature of the narrative just makes for a super unique piece of art. Despite all that, and even what I think the narrative is, the greatest thing about Shadow of the Colossus, and honestly the reason it's probably still as highly regarded today as it was on release, is that I'm probably wrong about the narrative. To understand where I'm coming from and make sure that you didn't just waste your time listening to the last 4 pages of nonsense, I need to explain to you the death of the author. No, not that kind of death, you weirdo. In 1967, literary critic Roland Barthes posited the notion of the death of the author. The TLDR version of it is, once the creator of a piece finishes writing and releases it to an audience, it's no longer their piece creatively. Audiences judge and assign meaning to it based on their own experiences and interpretation of the text, separated both from the originator's intent and even their personality. For example, J.K. Rowling coming back decades later and saying that certain characters were one thing or another, and her being generally not that great of a person, shouldn't really impact your consumption of Harry Potter, because once she stopped writing words, they stopped being her stories and characters. I mentioned this as the director of Shadow of the Colossus, Fumito Ueda, sees the game as a prequel to Team Ico's previous game, Ico. In fact, he doesn't even see his take on the narrative as canon. He wanted fans to assign their own meaning to the game. As such, any individual who plays Shadow can and should derive their own meaning. I mean, if you played it and saw it as an allegory for pollution and the destruction of the environment, or how society still demonizes unwed mothers, I could totally see that. Heck, one of my favorite things about Shadow of the Colossus is the discourse around the story. Every time I read into it, I take something new away from it, and I never feel like any of them are wrong. If anything, you get a better idea of the author from what they take from the piece. Now, while I may not be 100% right about Shadow of the Colossus being a straight-up Greek tragedy, the fact that you can glean as much as people do from it screams Greek myth, but they're more contemporary interpretations. As the stories have been re-examined and recontextualized with time, new and more nuanced meanings have risen from these centuries-old texts. And while obviously not to the same degree, Shadow of the Colossus seems to be undergoing a similar sort of thing. I mean, look at how modern interpretations of Zeus, the just leader of the gods, have reframed him as a total scumbag and again sex pest. I mean, if you do see Wanderer and Mono as lovers, you could argue that this is a retelling of Oedipus Rex, which itself is a Greek play that was recontextualized into psychiatric theory. What I'm trying to say is, in its simplicity and vagueness, Shadow becomes a talking point that we as gamers continue to discuss years after release, and it allows us to revisit its meaning in a more contemporary setting. And if that doesn't scream masterpiece to you, well, I don't really know what else can fall into that category. But what do you guys think? Is Shadow of the Colossus just an overhyped boss rush game? Or maybe you have your own unique take on it? I genuinely want to hear what you guys think the story is about in the comments below. Give a like or dislike depending on your horoscope, and subscribe to see more or less. I'll do anything for a sub. Anything.
Here are the ground rules. You can punch me, kick me, pull my hair. I am A-OK being stabbed. Biting and scratching are on the table. You can use fire.
These are the ground rules? Is there anything off limits?
Damn, man. You got something really sick you want to do, huh? Oh, you little pervert.